This might not seem like much, but follow along in the written description below. This is extremely thought-provoking information. It is a lot of information to take in all at once. Compare it with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous if you would like. All right, let's begin. Cue the music.
But I know the reason why you keep your silence up. No, you believe the hurt doesn't show, but the pain still grows. Some strangers to you and me. I can hear it coming in the air tonight. Hold on. But I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Hold on. I can feel it in the air tonight. Hold on.
I wrote this chronologically to give a timeline to explain how addiction occurs and then how that is still relevant in avoiding addiction if someone's coming of age, like if they're 16 years old, or if they're trying to escape addiction. So all this information, it seems like it's all negative and it's going to be like sad information, but it's not. It is extremely thought-provoking and it is extremely useful information. To begin, I wrote what everyone felt to be true. This like sensibility people have in regards to the environment and youth and just the cityscape as a whole. I wanted to write that feeling, and that was my starting point. So that is number 3 and 4 of this model. But in making this into a timeline, I came up with much more information than I ever thought I would. And this model has grown to be much more than I thought was possible. So let's begin. Number 1 is birth. And this has been written as a timeline, of course, so it had to be has to start at birth, just to give perspective to the whole sequence of events and how they are still relevant continually. But as it was written, it says birth with an asterisk, and the asterisk is for the fact that addiction weighs heavy upon the minds of current addicts, both men and women. Addiction strongly deters vulnerable adults from the circumstances to have a successful parenthood. So in that way, it is continually relevant. But for the most part, number 1 and 2 are just background and are not able to be changed. Number 2 is life plan. As it was written, it states, starting to take effect after puberty, a life plan requires ongoing guidance from parents. So in the timeline of events, this can be understood as like 16 years old, right after puberty, when early life is transitioning into the person going into what they're going to do for the rest of their life. Now, once again, this is just background, and any particular understanding of the circumstances aren't always the case, and it can really happen to anyone, anywhere. But at any rate, number 2 is life plan. Okay, number 3 is immature rebellion, and it states individuals seek out a kinship with their peers that can drift from life goals. Behaviors formed in this time can stay present for decades, and behaviors are often associated with peers and progress towards culture slash countercultural norms of the time period. This is one of the most relevant stages because this stage will continue throughout the entire process of addiction until it plays out in full, and then a person no longer has this social aspect and is just going to take it all on themselves in number 7. But at any rate, this has a large part to play in people finding themselves in situations that lead to addiction that they had no intention of having come about due to friend dynamics and peer groups. So that's number 3, immature rebellion. All right, number 4 is titled environment. Through the environment, peers and culture, individuals are introduced to addiction. Repeated exposure to addiction over time leads individuals to try addictive chemicals, and addiction sets hold very quickly, even first use. That's how I've written it. I like to add onto this one. People say no. One time, maybe 30 times if they have to, but maybe not 31 times. In this way, repeated exposure over time leads to tri-addictive chemicals. This is a common question people ask in recovery if they're strong enough to go back to where they were living or with their boyfriend or girlfriend or friends who are using because now they feel really strong in their recovery. But ultimately, the answer is no. People just have to recognize that repeated exposure does lead to use. And even if you don't succumb after 31 times, it's still really stressful being around someone who's using. Like if you're like stuck around someone. So number three and four, those mechanisms of three and four are really what plays out in a broad sense that we see in like the cityscape of Minneapolis, where there's like addiction everywhere. It's those two things, especially when people are coming of age. So in the chronology of this model, number four can be thought of like when the peer group starts to interact with the culture as a whole. And in this version, obviously, that's in regards to addiction. So the peer group is now, for one reason or another, is now hitting the general trends of like the streets and ends up using the chemicals that are out there due to there being addiction ever present or whatever in the culture or strong trends towards addiction. So that's number four, environment. All right, this is getting kind of heavy. Let's take a little interlude here.
And so I cry sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head. And I feel it a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and get real high. And I feel the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey,
All right, number five is early addiction. So, in early addiction, a person at first notice of having an addiction will recognize that they're powerless over their own addiction and will now force to start to become compliant with their addiction. If no one intervenes, then all the circumstances that led to this addiction start or was allowed to start, the addiction to start, will now just continue unabated and the addiction will run its full course unless someone intervenes. So I speak about intervention on number five because typically that is how people will react to their early addiction. When they recognize that they're powerless and they're in way over their head, they're going to be hoping that someone will come and rescue them. Like police, the courts, parents, friends, doesn't matter. As long as someone recognizes what's happening to them and that they're powerless and that they're about to go down a road they really don't want to go down and they're powerless to change that result as it looks at that time to them, they don't know what to do, so they're hoping someone will intervene. So that is number five, early addiction. Number six is the primary addiction. So through the physical mechanisms of addiction, a person's mental capacity will be altered and distorted, although they're still going to try to remedy their life. That's how I have written it. Now, basically, at this stage in the primary addiction, this is when people really run amok the most, and this is where people get their reputation for addicts, and that like whatever happens, happens, and you can't really change anything. This is because is when people run amok the most, number one. But why that is because the person, the individual, has now tried to escape their addiction every way they can and has failed over and over again. So when someone else comes in and just gives them like a standard response, or like they don't really fully understand, or they're not going to follow through, or they basically don't understand like what it's going to take or what's actually happening, and they're just going to give too short of an answer basically to them. So the person's just going to ignore that because they already know that that's not going to work. So that is number six, the primary addiction. So this is the stage that is generally hardest to. They have now mutated into a new methodology in order to do their addiction. They have no choice because that's the chemical is making them alter their what they're going to do in order to perpetuate this addiction, and they don't know how to escape, basically. All right, number seven. So number seven is titled negative feedback loop, and the addiction continues, and things will get worse and worse until the person becomes highly motivated to escape their addiction despite any obstacle, withdrawal, environment, you name it. At this point, they're going to escape no matter what because it's a fight for their life, basically, at this point. So I titled it Negative Feedback Loop. You can think of this as like, oh, the person isn't their right self, so therefore they can't do as they normally would. So things start to deteriorate, lose this, lose that, and then it's just each of these things make it worse and worse. You lose your job, you lose your housing, well, you lose your car, you lose your job, you lose. So that's how this plays out. It's a negative feedback loop until things get so bad that they become highly motivated to escape. Even though the obstacles are quite great, they're going to be so motivated, and this motivation will continue in order to actually escape. It's just a matter of after that point, in the coming points, to then know everything they need to know to make sure that that ultimately is a success. So that is number seven, negative feedback loop. Okay, number eight is detoxification. So detoxification occurs and all mechanisms of addiction fade over weeks and months, and individuals start to be able to regain their natural maturity, decision making, self esteem, and they're able to clearly identify their intended goals and needs in life. So, number eight is the halfway point. It's obviously one of the most critical points, detoxification, but it's the intermediate between 7 and 6 and 5 when they were forced to do something against their best interest because of the addiction. So it's almost like a form of insanity. So in number eight, in continuing, the individual will have some degree of like trauma, no matter what, like a mental illness from their conscience being broken over and over again by their own actions that they did not want to do. They weren't able to live how they had wanted to. So basically, their maturity will be delayed to a certain extent. Maturity in this I define as behaviors and responses. So they aren't able to behave and respond as they would like to because of the addiction. Therefore, even if someone should be mature, they aren't able to fully operate in a mature way or how they would like to be. So that's number eight, detoxification. Number nine is the secondary addiction. New behaviors chosen by the individual replace behaviors associated with use, thought patterns, and habits. Living without harm, health, well-being, and housing becomes focus. So to think of this one, the context of 6 and 7, of having to do something you didn't want to do if you were in addiction on a daily basis. This is basically understanding that in the daily life of an addict, let's say you wake up, there's the one result throughout the day, which is that you're going to use. It's not really certain how that's going to happen, but it's essentially like a hunting instinct. And also, people have all kinds of peculiarities that they'd like to wonder about, that really makes sense when you understand that all of the person's habits were centered around this one action. So they're like, oh, why do I feel happy or like almost high when I just pick up the drug, for example, even before I've gotten high? Well, it makes a lot of sense because all of your habits were centered around this one thing. So you might have habits that are coping mechanisms. You might have habits that are feeding into this ideology, or like all kinds of things that make it possible for yourself to live with yourself to as much as you can. At any rate, that all has to be acknowledged, and all those habits, since they're centered around addiction, are just going to lead right back to addiction unless they're replaced with some habits of choice. So a great starting point is whatever was, bothered the person about what they weren't able to do. That's a great start. Or if they had a previous time in their life that was more innocent or didn't have anything to do with addiction, they can start there with something that they already liked without addiction. It wasn't centered around addiction. Regardless, I don't have the answers for any of these. These are just things to know. I'm not really giving outright recommendations. It's just I've gathered up the experiences of hundreds of people, for example, and that is why I'm sharing this information. So there's number 9, the secondary addiction. Number 10 is long-term stability. After the first 4 seasons of sobriety, the natural rhythm of life can be settled upon. Efforts should be compartmentalized, one at a time, in order of importance. Each individual advancement weaves together into long-term stability. All long-term goals are accomplished in time through direct effort. Now, in this stage, new behaviors having taken effect, everything should be resolved, and it's just a matter of getting things accomplished. Housing, work, relationships, possible court interference, stuff like this, all the above weave together into long-term stability. And that's why I recommend compartmentalization in order of importance so that you don't get overwhelmed. But that is the whole model. There is much more that I have to say, and I think even this page is much better in written form than it is spoken. It's a lot of information, and it's hard to get someone's attention span to bombard them. And these are very thought-provoking things, and there's a lot of connections that can be drawn that maybe won't be illustrated in this form, but it is such important information that I thought that hopefully I can get this information out as quickly as possible. I may remake this video at some point in time, but this is the Gerald Madden model of addiction from the Standard Teaching for Addiction by myself, Eric Madden. Alrighty, have a good day. Alright, that's everything. Now remember, this is just an outline so you can rearrange and put in your own experiences in any which way you want. Of course, this is basically the exact stages in a general overview that's going to be true for everyone as far as I can tell. So I've done my best to make that certain and combine as many brilliant things as I could. This exact specifics of any individual person's life I can't include because it'd be different from someone else's. So this is just an overview. So there you go. And like I said a few times, the whole book is really necessary for this problem to be understood and analyzed and solved. Let us all hope. So, all right, take care. Oh, and one more music cue.
And so I cry sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it